Jeff, could you tell us how you actually came to work in the audio industry? Were you a music addict, or did you do it through playing with a band?
Hello, everybody, wherever you are. Both, really. I was always interested in sort of sound technology and recording from when I was pretty young. And when I was in high school, we had a band. So when I was about 14 or 15, before that, I'd played clarinet and piano in school and at home. But when I got to be about 16, I learned guitar. So that leads you to electronics a little bit and recording when you want to record your practices or your gigs. So it started pretty early, my interest in technology and music.
Do you still practice clarinet?
I don't play it now, but it turned out that I've used it. This will jump ahead a bit, but I went to university. I'll just tell you about that. I went to university in a place called Case Institute of Technology that was in Cleveland, Ohio, and I did physics. So one of the areas I got involved in was acoustics, and one of my professors was a very famous acoustician who helped fix the clarinet I actually had so that it played better. But that's a side story I wasn't going to tell.
You do still do the guitar, and I've seen several guitars in your room, yeah?
Yeah, well, yes. I pretty much played music from the time I was 5 years old and never stopped, actually. So it's a huge part of my life.
You were granted a bachelor's degree in physics while you were living in USA, but then how did it happen that you moved to Great Britain?
I'll try to make this short. So I worked with a band after university and a woman who was very talented, and we wrote songs and recorded them and took them to Los Angeles and New York and tried to become, professional songwriters. But the music was very musical and nice to listen to, but it wasn't rock and roll and it wasn't dance music. So even though we got some contracts, they never turned into anything. And after 3 years, I got fed up with the music industry. So at the end of being fed up, I couldn't think of how we could do any better. So I started looking at places to go for back to academic environments. And to cut a very long story short, I wound up hearing about a fellowship at the University College Cardiff in the physics department. The interesting thing was the professor in charge of the Cardiff physics department knew the professor who did the acoustics, who had fixed my clarinet. So I didn't actually have to apply to University College Cardiff. They just said, come over. So I did. Well, it sounded like fun then too, but I just left everybody I knew. It was quite a big step to take. I thought I was going for 4 years as well.
We know that you were granted a PhD. This PhD degree, it was in psychoacoustics. Could you tell us about your job that was related to this study? Of all the subdisciplines of physics, how did you came to choose the psychoacoustics?
That's a good question. The physics department specialized in a few areas. One was musical instrument acoustics and also some psychoacoustics and traditional physics. And I was left to find what interested me and somehow got interested in how people hear directions of sound coming to them and how they know where they're coming from. And one of the things that interested me most was how do you hear something that's up above you, or anywhere above you? You actually can tell where it's coming from, if it's high or low, and that became one of my strongest interests. And one of the experiments I did was to measure people's hearing based on how high a speaker was. And to get a small speaker, I used a spark, high voltage. And because I was studying high frequencies, you could put these frequencies through the spark, which was tiny, and very precisely identify the different positions or fix the speaker at different positions very precisely and measure the person's hearing to those frequencies very, very precisely.
This, what you say, a spark, is it some kind of very narrow directional speaker?
No, I made it out of 2 electrodes and 2 little pieces of wires. And so there was a tiny spark that big.
Okay, yep.
And that was the loudspeaker.
You were listening to a spark?
Yes. Sounded like a very tiny speaker for high frequencies, not low frequencies. Well, it was for measuring how people's hearing, you play individual frequencies and you measure their hearing response as a function of frequency and a function of position. The high frequencies tell you how high, what the elevation is. Low frequencies tell you that along the horizontal, and high frequencies do vertical. So I was going to say in the mid frequencies tell you which side of your head.
So you were doing these experiments throughout your study time. They resulted in you getting a PhD, right?
Yeah. The interesting part of what I was telling you about is that I wound up making a sound that you could listen to, that you can listen on a headphone, and it moves up and down in your headphone. Synthesize what the measurements told me.
Which year was that?
I finished that in 1977.
Was that an original research, or did someone do some similar research before?
There was a little bit of similar research, but not the results were slightly different, and the conclusions had been slightly different.
Jeff, after the study, you started to work with Digital Audio Research Limited. Not even work, you have founded the company. Could you tell us about what were you doing? What was your product?
Okay, well, there's a bit of a gap there. I'll make it in a sentence. After my PhD, a few years went by trying to find work. And what is interesting to you maybe is that I started looking at building a digital audio recording studio with the equipment in 1978 to see if you could do it. It was a bad idea. It was too expensive and the equipment wasn't ready. I started meeting people who were involved in digital signal processing in 1978 or 9. And that was at the Polytechnic of Central London. They had a digital signal processing group. This comes before digital audio research, because I didn't start the company right away. I actually did research and learned about digital signal processing from 1979 to that's when I started. Computers were just becoming able to process audio. So the research I did there was on different subjects, simulating like a de-reverberation system, trying to take reverberation off of voices. I also studied, that was a simulation I built, and that's when I started learning how to manipulate audio. There's no point to make a company because I didn't have anything to sell.
This de-reverberation technology that you mentioned, was it successful, or did it stop with just being a research?
What you could do was, the idea was to improve speech intelligibility for people who had normal hearing and bad hearing, hearing impaired people. So we were trying to understand if you could help people who couldn't hear well to understand speech better. And the result was mixed in that some words you could make easier to understand and some words you made harder to understand. I won't make it more complicated.
It was the job which aimed to find some interesting technologies that could be used and applied in medicine, correct?
Yes, it was funded by the British Medical Research Council. So we applied for a grant, and that's what funded that.
Okay, let's move on. And as far as we understand, this research and this work eventually it led you to create the digital audio research.
I knew you would find a way to get to that. Yes. Okay. But well, the thing was, I didn't jump from university into starting a company. I spent 3 or 4 years learning signal processing and getting better at processing inside computers to simulate ideas. But that takes me to a little slideshow that we could have if you want at this point. So I'll start a little slideshow. But what happened back then was I was trying to think what could we do with this, the ability to process on computers. That they were very primitive. I'll show you what they looked like in a second, as long as I get the right picture here. Because I wrote about digital recording studios in a magazine, somebody contacted me. The person who recorded sound for the dialogue for Monty Python films contacted me in 1980. And we talked about using digital signal processing for the film industry. We tried to find something to do for the film industry. Yeah, so about a year later, in 1981, I came up with the idea that you might be able to do dialogue replacement automatically with digital signal processing. So I started in about 1981 working on a mini computer. Now, that isn't the exact one, but the two parts at the right, you can see the computer that's about the same as the one I used, and those disks in the middle each hold 5 megabytes. The memory in the computer maximum could be 1 megabyte. What I had to learn about turned out to be technology that was developed for rocket science.
Yeah, do you say this literally?
Literally. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but there was a technology called dynamic programming that helps find a way to go from one place to another, which is part of the problem in solving how to line up two speech signals. Okay, so part of the solution to lining up two signals is this idea about dynamic programming, choosing a special path, and that's what they needed for guided missiles back in the 50s. So let's just go into the. Okay, so in this picture at the left is what comes in. If you're trying to align to, you asked about digital audio research. This work was done in the company that became Digital Audio Research. We didn't make a company until we had something we could show would work. So the research, I basically figured out you could break the problem into 3 parts. The first part is analyzing the spectrum of the signal as it comes in, the changing spectrum. Okay, that's the first part of the signal you have to understand. And then the next part, the very clever part, that I didn't develop the original technology, but the signal processing for missile alignment can do the time alignment of the spectra of the dub and the guide. So it works out what is the best path, how can you modify time and get the best alignment path to make the energy spectrums match up. So once you know what the alignment needs to be, then you have to give that to an audio editing system that will modify the actual audio to make it match the time warping path. So this should make it a little bit easier to understand. If the time along the bottom is the timing of the guide signal, and the timing going up on the left on the J axis, if you know what I mean, that's the dub. That little dotted line is saying things like repeat a frame or like 10 milliseconds of the dub 3 times, and then repeat, then play 10 milliseconds of the guide, then skip 10 milliseconds of the dub, then play a few more dub frames in a row, then skip some, then repeat some. So it's like a little recipe that is the instructions for the editor to repeat or skip parts of the audio. Actually, it comes down to looking at parts of the right part of the signal at the right time to match it up. We won't go much more into that, but I'll quickly show you why it takes 4 years back then. So here's some of the problems in the 1980s. If you have lots of little knobs to tweak, you tweak one and try it again. Processing 5 seconds takes 20 minutes, and there's no graphic output.
It sounds like you should have been using stimulants to do that. Otherwise, you couldn't hope to finish the research.
Well, I showed this to Oleg earlier. One of those large blocks is an array that changes every 10 milliseconds. So you had to look at all those numbers and then look at the next block and see what's different.
Probably someone somewhere, maybe you, have conducted the research. How long does it take for a brain to explode in a situation that you faced back then?
It's funny. All you do is, all I can remember is just being very interested in it, but you do have to concentrate when there's nothing else you can do.
How long were you actually working in the environment like this and with the tools like that?
Well, it was from 1981 to 1984, but you'll see what it looks like in 1984. It's a little different than than that computer. What eventually happened is because I made it work, and then several people, including a guy from the BBC, joined us, and we built over the next few years this system that had two computers and signal processing chips and could process this whole algorithm.
This box looks
smaller.
Smaller, much less spacey than the mini computer that we have seen before.
Well, that box was tested on a lot of films in London, and then we did form a company. That's what you've been waiting for, which was, well, eventually it was called Digital Audio Research, so that's the interesting part. And we only sold 2 of these boxes, 3 actually. One was to Warner Brothers, one was to Universal, and one was to a company in Sweden. And the first films it got used on complete films were Dune and Goonies, if you know either of those films. It was also used on Passage to India and Lady Hawk and a lot of films around the early 80s. But it started being used on feature films in Los Angeles after 1985.
That's really cool. Jeff, how much did you charge for this box?
It was about £55,000.
Oleg says that he thinks that it looks like a large sum of money for quite a simple process like this. Yeah. Well,
inside that box was I think it was a 300 megabyte disk, and also an interface to the film system. That the way it worked was they would play the line that they were replacing. The actor would say it at the same time, and the original and the actor's voice went into our system. Then they rewound the film, and it finished processing while they rewound it. And so when they played it back, it was the replaced voice.
As Oleg says, there were 2 recordings happening at once. If we get it right, maybe yes, maybe not.
Oh yes. Yes.
Two tapes recording the video recording and separately the audio recording. And then the audio recording, the original, it was in its sense re-recorded back to match the videotape.
We recorded the actor speaking the line at the same time we recorded the actor's original recording that he did on when he was being filmed. Obviously, the original recording matches the picture because they were done at the same time. So the trick in this is to match the actor's studio recording with the on-set recording. And so when it plays back, the studio recording is edited to match the on-set recording, which matches the picture.
That sounds almost like an analog VocALign.
It is VocALign eventually, yes. Well, it wasn't analog at all. Not analog in a electronic sense. Everything was digitized.
But the recording was done to tape?
So no, to hard disk.
So basically, it was recorded to tape and then immediately digitized.
In this box, its own digital converter. So the tape that's being played with the original recording is being digitized. At the same time, the actor's voice is being digitized.
We're looking and we're using VocALign here now, today, and we can understand that in digital. But then when you look at it, it's basically a VocALign in a big box. And then it's really confusing.
It is VocALign in a big box, but
it's not only confusing, it's amazing.
And also amazing, yes.
In that box are two computers, and they're two single board computers and a digital filter bank that was used in telephones for touch tones.
How did you develop the idea?
Okay, well, the next phase of my life was we started, our little company got sold to a big company, and we got funding to develop an editing system that looks like that.
Tell us what we see, because it looks like a weird telephone or something.
The screen in that is about the size of an iPad.
How convenient was that, based on the feedback of the people? Did people use that a lot?
Yes, it was probably the fastest editor that existed, and it's probably still faster than some of the things you can do today, because you could, instead of looking for menus, all those buttons you just press. They're immediately there for the main functions, and you could scroll the audio with those knobs, and if you just touch the screen to move objects that represent sound around the screen. The company I was involved with developed that, and we grew. Digital Audio Research became a well-known company for the number of years, and these machines cost on the order of about £60,000 for 8 tracks, and about over 100,000 pounds or $150,000 for 16 tracks. There was another big box that went with this. So to cut a long story short, I left that company in 1994 and started Synchro Arts in 1994. And by 1995, we had a plug-in version we had to call it something else, so we called it VocALign, or came up with the name VocALign.
Did you found the company alone, yourself, or with your colleagues that might probably still work with you now there?
I started it by myself, and then the first person I hired was our technical director, John Elwood, who's still with me today. But also one of the other people with me at Digital Audio Research is doing our signal processing. Jonathan Newland was with me at DAR, and he's with me now in Synchro Arts. So a bunch of old people. It's staying together, I guess, is what we have.
You have created the first version of VocALign. What happened next?
No, VocALign, when we started it, just started being used in good films, good TV shows, and music back in the old days. And we kept selling that happily. Let's see, we started in 95. So in 2000, I got some ideas about using the technology in consumer applications. So those are just some of the early ones. I mean, those would have been the first few years, and we don't keep track of everything that it gets used on. People don't like to talk about it because it takes away from, it sort of embarrasses maybe the performers, because they don't want to be known not to be able to get timing. Before I started Synchro Arts, there were two ways we could have gone with the technology. One was consumers, where I had thought about in 1994 that we could let consumers replace the voices in movies, or I could do professional audio. And I chose in 1994 to go for professional applications because home computers weren't that good at the technology required to do consumer applications with this.
Still, the idea of going to the consumer market, it remained within the company.
Yes, and I started to visit studios in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, Burbank, and talking to them about this technology and this idea. So I visited DreamWorks in 2000. I'll let you stop. I'll stop there so you can. And also, before I was visiting there, we had funding from Virgin Interactive to create a consumer product, but they were bought by another company that ran out of money. Our company was up to 10 people, and we needed to find a way to pay for all those people and do more technology. So one contract ended. That's why one of the reasons I was looking in Hollywood for another type of activity. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, we went to DreamWorks on the right day, and they were looking for a feature to put on their DVD. And basically, they liked the idea of what we were going to call a ReVoice studio. And they gave us, I think, 3 or 6 weeks or months or something to actually create the whole thing. And we did it. And it became a very well-known feature on that DVD, on the first Shrek DVD. And it meant you could put the DVD in a computer, in a PC, and this application would come up, and you could record your voice reading the lines. And when you played it back, your voice was lip-synced to the character. It was interesting because we were told nobody in Hollywood would ever let us put their voices on real film people, but we did an animation first, and that worked really well. What happened next was we actually got on the Austin Powers in Goldmember because that was Mike Myers, who was Shrek. So that was lucky. Then we did a film with Stuart Little, which had people in it, and Bare Naked Ladies, which is a band, and Girls Aloud. We had a feature on a CD-ROM. All of those had different interfaces for synchronizing the user's voice to the film clips. And then, as you said before, shit happens. So what happened in this case was on Christmas Eve in 2002, I was phoned up by the lawyers of DreamWorks saying that they were being sued for our technology infringing his patents that were about user image replacement. We had to actually stop doing all those projects and fire most of the people in our company. And it took until 2008 before he actually, the California courts made the decision that nothing was infringed and his patents were not good patents, and he lost some of his claims and lost the lawsuit.
What were you doing for all those long 6 years?
Coming up with something new.
not drinking ale in a pub.
Well, no, John and I owed the bank £100,000, so we had to come up with something. The company had too many people, and we had to pay them. But by the time we let them, we had to lose them all. John and I owed the bank £100,000. So there was another consumer project that started that helped pay back the banks and get us started again. But that company ran out of money as well. So we went back to doing things we know about. Or actually what I just started thinking about is, could we also transfer pitch? And could we let users create personalized ringtones? This is in like 2005 or something like that. Yeah, and also, so we basically started to try to improve our algorithms. I'll just show you a little bit about this. So I'll go quickly. If you imagine you're flying over a mountain range of matching attempts that have scores for how good they are, and you compare them, there'll be a valley that shows the best score and the best path for alignment. You don't have to worry too much about the technology. Just look at the pictures. So the guide is at the bottom and the dub is on the left. And the black clouds are, if you look closely, you can see that little dotted line. That's finding the best matching path between those two signals. So it just shows that all the different trial paths are those little fluffy bits. Every one of them, every point represents trying to match. So we improved our alignment technology to start with. So this is like the one you saw before, but we've added in two things. And the thing is, you can select a feature like pitch and measure that, or analyze the pitch of the guide and the new signals. And then there's a box that says calculate the feature adjustment, which means how much do you need to change, say, the pitch to make it the new signal like the guide. And then once you know how much, then you just modify the new feature, or you modify the pitch to get an output signal. I'll show you a simpler picture that shows you what's going on. This one shows you a male singer and a female singer trying to sing the same parts. And you can see their pitch traces are in different time and in different shapes. So you need to figure out how to match the timing up, and then you can work out what the shapes are to correct the pitch, which is the blue line at the top. And then you correct the pitch. If you see, look at this, the one at the bottom is changing to match the one at the top more.
This is more understandable, because this pitch correction line, that the same that we see in the VocALign, it's more clear than the schematics in the boxes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this shows you what's actually happening to a signal as opposed to the signal path. So we're doing this for consumer products because we weren't sure the quality was going to be very good.
What did you get as the results? Was the quality enough for the professional usage?
No.
Yeah.
No, not even close. But I can show you roughly. So we first put this onto a website where you could record a short piece of you singing along with a pop song and then sending it to another person's phone. So I'll show you what it sounded like, sort of. So here's a little bit of the person singing it.
A woman found that she could shake it, and she took it from me. No, we're gonna shake and shake it the best that I can today. Cause you can't stop the motion of the ocean, of the sun, the sky. Can wonder if you want it, but I never asked.
It rocks.
So here's what happens when you fix it.
This is how the world began. A woman found that she could shake it, and she took it from me. No, we're gonna shake and shake it the best that I can today.
I'll stop that because it's not working.
We understood that the person records his or her voice, and then it's being the voice in the song is replaced with the person's voice. Yeah.
Yes, but all time and pitch corrected too.
And it sounds within it. It sounds in the groove. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and I'll show you. I think I can show you one better in a minute. Then we did a DVD or a CD-ROM disc with 5 songs, and that got released as a kind of a project. And then we did an iPhone app that was there till recently, but it's very, I'll explain the problems in a minute. So you could record like karaoke, like any other app, but you could also do multi-track and multi-users, and basically the software tunes and aligns and enhances it. And here's an interesting one, if it'll work. So how does it compare with like an auto-tune correction? I'll try and do the examples now. Tell me how you're going to be without me. If you ain't here, I just can't breathe. That's the input. No air, no air. Now, hopefully I can play this. Got me out here in the water so deep. This is auto-tune. Tell me how you're going to be without me. If you can't hear, I just can't breathe. No. And here's ReVoice Technology. Fingers crossed.
Got me out here in the water so deep. Tell me how you gonna be without me. If you ain't here, I just can't breathe. It's no air, no air.
Yeah, that sounds way more natural.
Yes, but it still wasn't. The quality wouldn't be good for professionals. So what that was all being done on the phone, and it's done in 2 seconds, all of these things. I won't go into all the detail, but so what about professional audio editors? I didn't think it would be of interest, and I told Oleg this, that I was showing that process on my iPhone to Tony Maserati, who's a very top producer in Los Angeles. And, you know, why would he need to be able to transfer pitch from one voice to another was the question. And he said they really need it. So for all these things. So my marketing skills were not that good because I never thought professionals would want it, but I was wrong. So in 2011, a few years later, we started looking at the developing professional qualities, which included sound quality and workflow, a framework for the efficient professional workflow. So that's where ReVoice Pro came from. Basically, it was an idea that we didn't think of being, I didn't think of as being necessary or wanted, but once we made it so it could work in the DAWs and get the sound quality together, people started buying it, I guess. So that's how we got to ReVoice Pro. Here's a little bit of interesting, you saw this before. These are the costs of the software we created going down. And now VocALign is £99 this year. Consumer products are very hard to make a living on, the ones in blue.
So these 10 years were probably the hardest for the company, eh?
Yes, they were. Well, we were always selling VocALign, but we were trying to do more than that, I suppose, with consumer projects. And none of the consumer projects could make enough money because of the cost of licensing consumer films or songs. It's very expensive to do that, to license the media. And also, anything in the consumer world, people think it should be free. So, sticking to the future for professional things, for ReVoice, we're trying to see if we can make it more automatic. Foreign dialogue is interesting. Harmony correction is interesting. And maybe applications for teaching languages, too.
And now we have a provocative question to you. If you had known all the difficulties and all the, you understand, every thing that you faced during this lifetime path, would you do it again?
There's a few things you need. One of them is, and I think anybody that develops something new or is creative, you obviously have to believe in what you're doing. Also, feedback is sometimes helpful, but in the end, you have to make your own decision about, does it have a future? And sometimes if you come up with something too soon, you're so far ahead that it doesn't have a future yet. And that's really tricky to get through that.
That your story brings us to the second part of this question. There are a lot of young people out there. They strive to find their life path, their way to start, to begin their life journey. But probably they hesitate to decide what it's going to be. They don't know. What would be an advice that you could give to them to try and get over their concerns and their indecisiveness? Okay.
I'm very indecisive most of my life, except when except at the really important points, I made decisions, but I didn't know how big they were. And you just you have no idea where you're going to end up. But I think that the important thing is to choose things you like, that you believe in, and stay realistic. So if it goes wrong, you need to have a solution to that problem. And if you don't get that solution, you've got to try something else. So you stay optimistic, you believe in yourself, believe what you're doing, but know when to stop or change something.
Thank you. And we think it's a very important, could be very important advice. Jeff, your final word.
Most of my life, I suppose, I spend working a lot on my own, but the team that we have, and actually the best advice I can give is when you find really great people to work with, try to stick with them. They'll be very difficult sometimes. Everybody's a bit of a nutcase who's clever, who's creative. Work with people you really like and admire, and that makes a big difference.